Chapter 1. The Beginning. In the early morning hours of April 1st, 2243, it was still dark outside and the grass was wet with dew. It was a calm and quiet morning, much like any other. But different for one young man known as 744 5.76 7.753 or Phil767.753 Most simply refer to him as Phil767. He wasn't much more than a boy of 21 years old. He was lying on the floor of his bedroom, motionless, awake, and alert. His spindly frame was crumpled up uncomfortably on the floor. He was pretending to sleep even though he was wide awake with his eyes pinched shut. He was nearly overwhelmed with anticipation. His facial features matched his body type, thin and knobby. In the grayed-down colors of early morning, you could notice the shadow cast by the nose protruding from his face, pointy and bumpy, with a small bulb on the end. His cheekbones were prominent and his mouth seemed disproportionate and oversized for his face. His build was slight, more like his mother's, but he had a bold drive to succeed, much like his father. Phil767 lived by the philosophy that anything worth doing was worth doing right. He was a perfectionist with a passion for machines and technology. As he excelled in all of his studies, continually rising to the top of the class, he was highly intelligent but struggled somewhat with social skills. He was a nice guy but spent most of his time musing on what he considered to be the important things in life: science, technology, and, of course, gaming. Sadly, real friends most often didn't make the cut, unless they were a part of his interactive gaming session. That was as real as it got. There just wasn't enough time for a meaningful conversation, or even just hanging out. He was somewhat uncomfortable with the idea, and it was easier to just not make the effort. Even as a child, he found it difficult to make friends. He found them silly, always laughing and goofing around about nonsense, just foolishness. Why were they acting so stupid? Sometimes he would pretend to act like they did, just to get along. That got old. The whole time, he hated the way he had conformed and lowered himself to their level just to fit in. The charade wore thin after a while, and he would play by himself, drawing, figuring, and designing futuristic devices and inventions. He created elaborate city plans and buildings where people would live in when he was grown up. He imagined the advancements in science and technology would fix the social and uncomfortable emotional circumstances he seemed to always be a part of. He didn't completely understand how all of those kids failed to realize the importance of intelligent scientific design and how it might eradicate this human condition of awkwardness. Human emotions were too unpredictable. Machines, however, were designed for a particular purpose and performed accordingly to complete a task or solve a problem. Every problem has a solution, was his mantra. This pragmatic, analytical approach to scientific problem-solving excited him. If a machine would fail or malfunction for some reason, it could be reprogrammed or altered, fixed to perform better, or the way it was supposed to. People don't like to be referred to as malfunctioning. They can be touchy that way, and touchy wasn't a word that could be used to describe Phil767. He could even come across as harsh at times, or cold. Expressing or even feeling emotions made him uncomfortable. They weren't logical, and they clouded your thoughts. Emotions, he thought, were best dealt with in private, corrected, and logically solved. When he was by himself and not thinking about important things, he could address the random thoughts and feelings that interrupted him throughout the day. However, very early that morning, Phil767 had been tired, but couldn't silence the chatter of random what-if thoughts. Calculating numerous possible scenarios, he tried to logically organize the events that had transpired over the past few days. He posed new problems and came up with solutions, until finally he was beginning to fall asleep. The chatter of thoughts was reduced to whispers. He struggled to stay awake. He felt he had to. A young woman lay motionless in the bed next to him. Phil767 had positioned himself on the hard, cold floor between the bed and the doorway. He figured that he could thwart any possible escape attempt. If she, perhaps, woke up in the middle of the night, he'd be the first to know. His eyes closed. Almost immediately he was jolted awake. "Uff," he grunted. A small foot squished deeply into his belly. Swiftly, the young woman who had been lying in the bed spun herself to the far side of the bed. She dropped both feet to the floor and planted them firmly. In a warrior-like stance, she readied herself for a would-be attacker. Phil767's heart was pounding in fear and excitement. I hope you enjoyed this sample of Phil767, the Reluctant Luminary. Find out what happens next. Follow for more content and click on the link below, phil767.com. Thank you for listening.